So welcome all. We are so excited to have you here tonight. My name is Susan Siegel, and I'm here representing the Progressive Democrats of North Carolina and the Progressive Democrats of Orange County. Let me tell you about the Progressive Dems just a bit. We are a caucus of the Democratic Party, and just like the Democratic Women is. And tonight's event is being sponsored by both the Orange County Progressive Dems and also Durham and Wake County. And if there's anybody from Durham and Wake County chapters, you can stand up and be acknowledged. And we have Elizabeth here. Yay! Thank you. The Progressive Democrats of North Carolina and of Orange County, we are a diverse group of activists and advocates promoting and supporting progressive candidates, policies, and party leaders, and growing and strengthening the voice and influence of progressive Democrats. We encourage you to join the Progressive Democrats. You can sign up to be on our mailing list. You can you need to join the state caucus for $10 and join our local chapter for $5 if you want to become a voting member. Everybody is welcome to come to our meetings and our events and our actions. And you can also support our work by donating. We have a box at our table in the lobby, and you can also donate online and pay your dues online at our website. And your contributions help support programs like this, where we have to pay for venues and pay for snacks for the student Dems and things like that. Because you know, if you give them pizza, they will come. So now I want to tell you a little bit about our speakers tonight. We are so excited to have such wonderful and accomplished people to speak with us tonight. I once heard, when I first moved to North Carolina, I heard that the Triangle was famous for teas, trees, and PhDs. And all three of our candidates for Congressional District 4 have PhDs. Michelle Laws, who's not joined us yet, but will be along shortly. Michelle is a native of Chapel Hill, and she was born to a young single mother and grew up in the North Side community. She has been a social justice activist since the age of 10, when she advocated for playground equipment for children in public housing. Michelle is the assistant director for a local community health organization, an adjunct professor at an HBCU, a historically black university in North Carolina, and an ordained associate minister at Union Baptist Church in Durham. Her career has included stints as a campaign press secretary, a legislative liaison for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and she holds a BA in Mass Communications from UNC, a Master's in Sociology from North Carolina Central, and a PhD in Social and Behavioral Sciences. Representative David Price. Representative Price was born in Irwin, Tennessee, and attended Mars Hill College in Mars Hill, North Carolina, when it was a junior college. That was a ways back. He attended University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Yale University, where he received a theology degree and a PhD in political science. Representative Price first got involved in politics during the Civil Rights Movement in 1961 while studying at UNC. He was executive director and then state chair for the North Carolina Democratic Party prior to being elected to Congress, where he has represented District 4 since 1986, except for the years 1994 to 1996. In Congress, he serves on the Appropriations Committee and is the ranking member of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee. He also serves on subcommittees for Homeland Security and chairs the House Democracy Partnership, a bipartisan commission to strengthen representative institutions in emerging democracies. Some of his signature legislation includes the Price Education Affordability Act, which gives parents and students a tax break on their education loans, legislation to recruit high-quality teachers to classrooms throughout America, modeled after North Carolina's successful Teaching Fellows program, and legislation to strengthen high-tech worker training through community and technical colleges with his Advanced Technical Education Act. Richard Watkins, our third candidate tonight, was born in Tyler, Texas. In 1985, his family moved to Greensboro when he was 7 years old. Though on a full academic ride at Fayetteville State University, Richard played varsity football for the Broncos for the entire duration of his collegiate career. Go Broncos! Richard earned his PhD from the UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine in microbiology and immunology with a specialty in virology. His research focused on the factors that influence disease progression to AIDS in HIV-infected patients. Richard has founded a public nonprofit focused on the enhancement of North Carolina's scientific enterprise and economy. Richard serves as the CEO of the Science Policy Action Network, one of North Carolina's most influential state-focused general scientific organizations, and also serves as a program coordinator for UNC Chapel Hill's Chancellor Science Scholars Program. Richard lives in Durham with his wife Charity and one-year-old daughter. You might have seen her around here, the darling Margot. And last but certainly not least, we come to our wonderful moderator, Aaron Keck. Aaron is a WCHL radio personality and news anchor. Aaron in the afternoon, you may know him, is known to many by sound but not sight. And Aaron also has a PhD in political theory. Just can't get away from those PhDs. He's taught at Duke and studied improvisation at DSI Comedy Workshop. Writing for DSI Witness News led to WCHL staff recognizing his political knowledge, intellect, and good radio voice. You know, they say some people have a face for radio. Aaron has a voice for radio. He became a news writer, then news director before assuming his current on-air responsibilities. I'm now going to turn things over to Aaron, and he's going to explain the format and the rules for this evening's forum. And we just thank you all for being here, especially for our candidates and our moderator. And thank you all for being here, and enjoy the show.
Try to move this microphone back without making a whole lot of noise. Okay, thank you all so much for being here. We got a great crowd, and again, 2018 is a year when everyone is engaged in politics and government, and you just look around and see that's happening right here in our community. So each candidate's going to have 2 minutes for an opening statement. We'll ask the questions in alphabetical order of candidates, but we'll rotate through each question, so each person will have the opportunity to answer first and answer second and answer third, depending on the complexity of the question as determined by the people who came up with the questions over the course of the last couple of weeks. We'll give each candidate 1 or 2 minutes to answer. We'll also have a lightning round where you'll have 15 or 30 seconds to answer, so we can get through as many questions as we possibly can. And thanks to Michelle Laws for joining us as well. We'll let you know how much time you have for each individual question. Where is Kim? Kim is somewhere. There is Kim. She's going to hold up a yellow card when you have 30 seconds left. She'll hold up the slightly more insistent red card when you have 3 seconds left. Ignore at your own risk is what this says here. If you go over, you will see stern looks followed by harumphs and grumbles. At 7:40 or so, we'll collect questions from the audience. You should have an index card or have the opportunity to have gotten an index card. We got a bunch of questions already. When we ask for them, which will be about halfway through, hold up your questions. We'll have a couple people come around and pick them up, and then we'll work as many of those questions in as possible.
Is the timekeeper allowed to use a gavel? There's a gavel up here.
Oh, there is a gavel up there. Oh, well, give it to Kim, hey.
You want?
Why not? It wouldn't get used otherwise. There you go. We've got props now. It's 21st century. We'll have the lightning round, and then each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. A reminder to everyone, please turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate or some non-noise-making function. And I have been asked to insist and to remind all of the candidates that everyone out here will be listening very closely for specifics rather than sound bites. I will leave it up to you to determine the difference between the two. So we'll begin with our candidates' opening remarks. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and talk about their reason for running and what they'll do in office. We'll begin on the left with Michelle Laws. And if you could press the button that says push when you're ready to speak, that'll turn on your mic, and push it again, that will mute it.
Thank you, and thank you all for this opportunity to greet you and to share my vision as the next Congresswoman to represent this district. I am Michelle Laws. I'm a native of Chapel Hill, and I have been in this district most of my voting time. I proudly voted for Congressman Price. I think, however, where we are now in our country, we're at a serious crossroads where we need a type of leader who will represent us in Washington, D.C. these next 2 years under a Trump administration that has been wreaking havoc on people of color, on poor people, on just about any and everybody except himself. And I think we need someone who is bold and courageous and will go and clearly and visibly push back against some of the regressive policies that are harming immigrants, that are harming working class people and poor. Specifically, there's many issues that I think that we must begin to pay closer attention to and address. The one issue that I think ties to many of the social issues that are of concern to a lot of the people that I believe who represent District 4 is the wage gap. The growing wage gap between young people and adults, as well as people of color. So the wage gap, also Medicare, a healthcare system built and modeled after our Medicare system. There is no reason why in America we are not providing healthcare coverage to every single person in America, period. Education, I think we need education reform. I think we need to look at different pathways for young people to enter into careers that provide a viable living to them. So those are just a few of the issues that I think are important and I will advocate for. Thank you.
Congressman Price.
Thank you. I want to thank the Progressive Caucus for organizing this event and for all the work you've done over this last year to help us resist Donald Trump and build a progressive agenda for the future. I've had all these town meetings all over the place, and the Progressive Caucus is always there, speaking up for the Dreamers, speaking up for affordable health care, and so I appreciate the activism in this group and the contribution you're making to our overall party effort. I'm David Price. I'm honored to be your congressman, and I'm running for re-election to continue fighting for the issues that matter, the progressive issues that matter to our families, to our communities. Affordable housing, quality public education, accessible health care, good paying jobs for all members of the community, not just those already at the top. In fact, if Democrats take back the House, which I expect we will, then I'll do more than just speak out, more than just fight. As the chairman of the subcommittee that funds affordable housing and transportation, I'll be in a position to deliver on critical priorities for communities in the 4th District. I am determined to put housing on the front burner, right up there with education and health care, to make sure that people of modest income don't get priced out as our communities grow and develop. I'm also running for re-election to defend the hard-fought progress we've achieved against the most reckless and dangerous president in U.S. history, Donald Trump. He's taking a wrecking ball, not just to the accomplishments of Barack Obama, but to the foundations of our social safety net and our values as a democracy. So responding to these challenges will require vision, it'll require tenacity, it'll require experience and a proven track record of results. So I'm asking you to keep the faith, continue fighting. Let's fight together to create a brighter future for our community, our state, and our nation. I'm as fired up as I've ever been in my life. I'm proud to be part of the team that will take North Carolina and our country forward. I will appreciate your vote.
Richard Watkins.
I gave a talk yesterday, and it started off a certain way, and I think I'm going to start off today with the way I started off yesterday, by saying something unique. David Price, I love you, brother. Michelle Laws, I love you, sister. The reason why I say that is because we're all in the same fight together. And I love each and every one of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love my daughter, and to my beautiful wife and my rock, baby, I'm in love with you. Now, a lot of people are concerned about the direction that the country is going in, specifically the Democratic Party, how individuals are leaving in droves. Right now, Tom Perez is, I believe, at Duke University talking about messaging. Well, let me help the Democratic Party out. And for all of those filming, this actually goes out to the Republicans. Our fellow Republican brothers of this country and sisters of this country, come on over and be Democrats. No, seriously, seriously, seriously. It will save your life. This is not hyperbolic. Not too long ago, a very alarming fact came out that for some reason, white people were dying at an alarming rate. Now, this is not news to me. Black and brown people have been dying at an alarming rate for a long time, but for white people, they were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Well, it actually turns out that you may be dying due to Republican policies. Fact, out of the 5 states in the United States with the lowest life expectancy, all of them are Republican-led. So I have a message for you. Become a Democrat, live longer.
First question, this is going to go to Michelle Laws first, and then left to right to Congressman Price and Richard Watkins. Take 1 minute to answer this one. Do you support getting the influence of money out of politics? If so, what steps would you support to accomplish this goal? Michelle
I
Laws.
absolutely do. I think it's difficult for working class people and professionals who are at the middle income level to enter into politics. I think money is influencing this particular race. And so I think for us to really have a representative democracy, we should take another look at public campaign financing. I think we should remove the fees that are required to enter into a race. I had to pay in order to run in this particular seat, $1,700, which was a percentage of Congressman Price's salary. I think that anyone who is skilled, is competent, compassionate, and willing to go and fight hard should be given a fair shake. I also think we need to look at electoral reform altogether. And so taking money out of politics, I'm extremely aware of the dark money that comes in, but it just doesn't come in on one side. And so we need to make it transparent as to where money is coming from to support campaigns.
Congressman Price.
I'm the sponsor of the most comprehensive Campaign and Election Reform Act before the Congress at this moment, along with Senator Tom Udall in the Senate, the We the People Act. And including in the We the People Act is campaign finance reform legislation that I have championed during my entire time in public life. I want to restore public financing for presidential elections. That is something that we did very successfully for 30 years. It's the most significant of the post-Watergate reforms, yet the Republicans are trying to kill it. And then I have a proposal for public financing of congressional elections. It matches small contributions and would forever get rid of the big money, of the unaccountable money, of the independent so-called expenditures unleashed by Citizens United. We simply have to return politics to the people in this country, and that starts with forbidding that our political discourse be drowned out by big money.
Richard Watkins.
Aaron, of course I hope we can get money out of politics. There was a picture going up on the slideshow of the 3 candidates playing, I guess, pin the tail on a donkey. Basically, it was, can you mark this flippable congressional district? As in it flipped by, you saw Michelle Laws posting it up there, blindfolded. You saw myself posting it up there, blindfolded. And you saw David Price posting it up there without a blindfold. Ladies and gentlemen, as somebody without that much money, running this race is sort of like playing pin the tail on a donkey blindfolded against somebody who is not blindfolded. So as somebody who makes $55,000 a year, I'm just a regular person. I want what's good for my family. My ability to represent those I love and my community should not be affected by my ability to have a lot of money. So with that said, I agree with both Michelle Laws and David Price. Let's get big money out of politics.
Second question on healthcare. HR 676 is the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act. Do you support it? If so, how do you plan on working towards making it a reality? And if not, what is your plan to address our healthcare crisis? We'll begin with Congressman Price. Take 2 minutes for this one.
Yes, I'm co-sponsoring that legislation. The way it's going to be considered is for Democrats to win a majority in the House and Senate and be in a position to lead this debate. And in the meantime, we have a critical challenge in this country to prevent tens of millions of our fellow citizens from losing health care. And I think it was Richard who said, these things are matters of life and death. It literally is in this state. The single worst thing the Republicans in the General Assembly did, among many bad things, was to refuse to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And now Republicans in Washington are threatening to devastate Medicaid as we know it, not just refusing to expand, but radically cutting, block granting and cutting Medicaid, which affects millions and millions of people. And they're refusing to stabilize the Affordable Care Act, which is now working to cover tens of millions of people. Healthcare is under siege in this country. There's nothing more basic to our people's well-being and our way of life. We simply must win this election and turn this around.
Richard Watkins.
So I absolutely agree that healthcare is a human right, not just a privilege. The ability to access healthcare shouldn't depend upon whether or not you have a lot of money. Life is precious. And I think the most important thing that anybody can do is not simply sponsor legislation. That's important. That is critical. But you have to go out and be an advocate. You have to go to men, women, children, everyone, and say, listen, your life is important, and it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. And in fact, the reality is we can't afford not to do it because it costs far too much to allow people to get sick. One of the primary reasons that people lose their entire life savings is because they're underinsured. We have to go out into communities and do that. And I plan on being that advocate. I plan on going everywhere and actually changing minds of people who would actually vote against their own best interests to come on our side and support this. Because listen, everyone wants to grow old. Everyone wants to see their daughter get married. Everyone wants to see their grandchild graduate. Let's make sure that happens. Thank you.
Michelle Laws.
I agree. You have to do more than just sponsor legislation. You have to be a champion. And there is no evidence that Congressman Price has championed HR 676. And there is a very clear contrast between those who sign on to legislation that Democrats sign on to. We are the party that says take care of the sick. We are the party that says take care of the poor. We are the party that says build pathways for upward social mobility. There is it's one thing to sign on to legislation, but it's another thing to go out and to be a champion for a system that provides coverage for all. And we have not seen that. If we're honest, we have not seen that. One of the things, and I agree, I was the executive director of the state NAACP, working side by side with Reverend Barber when we got the news that our state was not going to, and we expected it, considering who was in leadership, expand Medicaid. And I was out there as often as I could be, fighting, standing side by side, going to the General Assembly, getting arrested, making it very clear that talk without action is like faith without works. And so I think that one of the things that we can do is, again, put it right on front the front and center of our agenda and make sure that people do know where you stand. I will do that. I think we also need to have an honest conversation about the pharmaceutical industry that's driving up the costs. No one wants to deal with big pharma because a lot of people are getting money from big pharma. We also need to look at the health insurance companies. And so there's a lot that we can do to expand the ACA, to improve it and make it better.
Next question. Talking about the Democratic National Committee, and this is going to go to Richard Watkins first. Do you believe the DNC needs a reform in order to better represent the voice of the people? And if so, how? Take 1 minute on this one.
I absolutely do. I think more people need to be involved with this entire process. What I see, and I don't think that I would have necessarily have known this until I decided to run, that actually the vast majority of people are not engaged with the political process at all. That is actually extraordinarily dangerous. I think one of the ways that we can actually figure this out and improve upon it is actually encouraging primaries. When you encourage primaries, that forces a conversation, that gives people more interaction with the people that represent them, and it does things like make history, like when the Democratic Party has its progressive caucus host a town hall like this. I believe it's one of the first times this has happened. So I do believe that encouraging primaries and actually getting more millennials involved with the political process is extraordinarily important. Thank you.
Michelle Laws.
I absolutely do. And as a matter of fact, I was late coming because I was meeting with some young people and program directors in Raleigh who deal with reentry. And I felt that it was important for me to be in both places. But our Democratic Party has left a lot of people behind. And we can't just blame the Russians, although that's a very convenient and easy target to blame. But the reality is we have become a party of elites, and this is a criticism that Hillary's campaign, as well as President Obama's administration, we're leaving far too many people behind. And it's up to us to make sure that we send the message and that we have the right messengers to say that we are the big tent. We are a tent of compassion. We are a tent that believes in people, that all are welcome. No one should be left behind. Everyone has a place. We are a big tent that believes in justice and mercy and fairness. But we're not there yet.
Congressman Price.
The reform of the Democratic Party, the building of the party we know we need and must have in this country starts in rooms like this, all over this state and all over this nation. My wife Lisa's with me here tonight. We went to a Democratic precinct meeting very soon after we came back to Chapel Hill. And it was a small meeting. My wife left the meeting as first vice chairman of the precinct. I always use that story when people talk about a party dominated by elites and a party you can't break into. You can break into it, you just have to work at it. You have to help get your shoulder to the wheel. And this party in Orange County is probably the best organized at the precinct level in the state, although Durham and Wake are getting there and others too. But the party has declined some from the days where the precinct committees were so robust. So we need to start at that level, and then we need to make sure up the line that we have full participation, full inclusion, and that includes a DNC that did fall short in this last election and needs a lot of work. But I think Tom Perez and Keith Ellison are giving it that, and I'm part of that solution.
Next question goes to Michelle Laws first. Take 2 minutes on this one. Talking about wealth inequality. What steps would you take to lessen wealth inequality in our country?
Well, it certainly would not be a bill that was just passed in Congress and compromises that were made on both sides that rewards and increases the wealth of the extremely wealthy already and leaves very little for those at the bottom. I also think we need to look at pathways for people to accumulate wealth and enter into careers that are rewarding careers. Right now, my main concern are the number of young people, poor, black, white, all race and ethnicities, and also people of color who are being educated in school systems that are not preparing them to have viable careers where they can make a decent living. There, and even here in our beautiful town, and I was a benefactor of it, went to Carolina, benefited from this awesome and amazing school system that we have. But we have to create pathways for young people who are not going to go to four-year colleges. And I believe in investing in our community college systems that allow people to get training in vocational trades as well as agricultural trades, and even technologies that don't require you to have a four-year degree, but that actually pay a decent living wage, increasing the minimum wage. We've got to begin to have that discussion again and get something done around that. I also believe that we should not be rewarding people who exclude folk from the workplace. So wherever there is bias in the workplace, we need to be real about it. And all too often, one of the failures of us as Dems is we don't talk about the big elephant in the room, and that's systemic racism and how that plays in terms of who gets to the top and who gets what. We need to have that robust discussion. As a Black woman, even though white women make 73 cents to the dollar, Black women make 68 cents to the dollar. And then when you look at Hispanic and Latino women, it's even less. So we need to look at wage disparities and the wage gap based on gender and race and ethnicity, and then open opportunities for people to build viable careers.
Congressman Price.
Well, the first thing we need to do is for public policy to stop making it worse. And the Republicans in Congress just passed a tax bill that makes it worse. Some reference to a compromise made on both sides? Not in my experience. I didn't have a thing to do with that bill. I opposed it tooth and nail, and every Democrat I know did the same thing. It's a Republican deal. It's a Republican deal, the tax scam, the Trump tax scam. It makes it worse. Of course, tax policy should help us. It should be a progressive tax code. It should be a tax code that helps us pay for government in an equitable way, in a fair way, and that calls on us in a fair way to make whatever contribution we need to make to the common good. But this tax bill is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. Then there are ways, of course, that public policy can help in positive ways, starting with a working wage, a decent living wage, starting with workplace equity, starting with family and medical leave, paid leave for families, so that with the birth of a child or an illness in the family or whatever, that it's not economically devastating. We need to have an economic development strategy in this country that doesn't just enhance the fastest growing and most advanced areas in terms of economic diversity, but that diversifies our whole country, that reaches into the small towns and rural areas. There's a devastating divide. A devastating divide between rural and small town America and the metro areas like the one we're fortunate to live in. And it is toxic. It is toxic. People are getting left behind, and the politics of Trump is reflective of that. We've got to get a hold of the situation that is leaving people out and that is leaving people without hope. So an economic development strategy that addresses the entire country, the entire spectrum, and then research, training, the kind of support for small businesses, especially minority-owned and disadvantaged small businesses, to give people a leg up. We need to get with this. This is the most important economic issue facing the country.
So I absolutely agree. I think the very thing that threatens the civility of our country is the gap between the billionaires and the rest of us. Wait, hold on 1 second. Let me actually survey the room. Show of hands if you're not a multi-billionaire. Just show of hands, don't I don't want to offend any multi-billionaires in the room. I just want to be, but we need to tax them.
There are quite a few people who didn't raise their
I know, I was like, yo, where you at? Holler at me. But no, honestly, they need to be taxed. They made their billions off of us. They need to pay it forward. They have no problem buying politicians. They have no problem buying elections. They have no problem influencing elections. They have no problem taking away our rights. It's time for them to pay it forward. We can pay for a lot of things if we tax them. Listen, when I say a civil society, I mean the thing that keeps people from shooting each other up in the streets. I mean the things that keep people from running each other over in cars. I mean the things that keep bombs from being mailed to people's houses. Listen, since the 1980s, it started to balloon, the gap between the top 1% and everyone else. Until today, we are at the largest gap that we ever have seen in American history. And Abraham Lincoln warned that when this happens, our democracy will be destroyed. I fear for the security of our country because of the extreme gap between the billionaires and everyone else. They need to pay more than they do. Thank you.
Before we get to our next question, a reminder, if you've got those index cards and you've got questions written on them, hold them up at this point. People will come around and collect them. We've already got a bunch. We've got a few more already. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible as we get to the end of the forum, which we're already halfway through. And we've asked about a third of the questions. First person on this is Congressman Price. Take 2 minutes for this one. On foreign policy and trade, China is emerging as an authoritarian rival on economic and geopolitical levels. What steps should this administration take in order to maintain the U.S.'s influence and to counter Chinese overtures to other countries? Congressman Price first.
China is a giant and growing economic power, our greatest economic rival on the world stage. And it is a country that doesn't play by the rules. We all know about the currency manipulation, which is apparently eased off some, but not intellectual property theft, not dumping of critical goods, not state subsidies, all the things that make the playing field in international trade not level and not fair. These are things that put our country and our workers at a disadvantage and have to be dealt with. So if the proposition is that the president, whoever it is, needs to address this and deal with it in an effective way, then I think there's very little quarrel with that proposition. Is that what Donald Trump is doing? I don't think so. In fact, I think Donald Trump is, in this area as in most others, is reckless, is really a dangerous president, and is making the situation far more threatening and far worse. I believe that fair trade and a targeted approach, an approach where you bring actions when you need to, you force discussions in the appropriate trade forums, that is the approach, not just the blunderbuss where you're slapping tariffs on everything and you're tweeting about what you're doing and you're it becomes the wild, wild west. That is not the way to solve our trade issues, and Trump is taking us down a dangerous path.
Richard Watkins.
I absolutely agree. We need to protect the American worker. That is the backbone of our country. And specifically, and I should have said earlier, I do support increasing the minimum wage. But I think that this conversation needs to take a different turn. Well, I do agree that we need to protect our workers and our economy from bad trade deals and then cheating the system from other countries and human rights violations that occur. I think one of the things that we also need to start talking about is the technological revolution that we're currently experiencing. I've had a lot of these conversations, and I think listening to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton when they were talking about manufacturing, they were talking about losing a lot of jobs to China or losing a lot of jobs here or there. I would argue that the vast majority of the jobs that we have seen being lost are lost to automation and technology. This is something that I've heard in small circles, but without a conversation that happens on a larger scale, we're not going to be able to protect our workers. Listen, the automotive industry, for example, right? It was saved, so to speak. Profit went through the roof, but however, employment kind of remained the same. And that has a large part to do with automation and technology. The same thing holds true for all manufacturing, and specifically for North Carolina, we first started seeing this with agriculture. We need to have a real conversation about what we're going to do with the technological revolution that is actually displacing the American workers. Because if we don't do that, we're actually not going to protect our American workers at all. Thank you.
Michelle Laws.
Well, the current president and his daughter can first start by closing down all their shops in China where Trump's attire being made. That would be a start, first of all. But I also think that we have to really begin to reinvest in American-made products. I was with a group of labor members over the weekend who had some concerns. And one of them said that, you know, they never seen a trade deal that Congressman Price didn't like, and they knew that NAFTA, for example, was bad. And in spite of bringing that to his attention, we proceeded. And so I think we got to listen to the American workers. We got to listen to those who are manufacturing in mills and in companies that are hanging on, barely hanging on. In Orange County, I've met people who used to work in the mills in Orange County, and their jobs were never replaced with something. They ended up on public assistance or looking at other means of making income outside of what they were accustomed to doing and what they like doing. So what we need to do is send a clear message that our first and main priority is building up the infrastructure, the manufacturing infrastructure, technology we already are driving. But the problem is the policies are so loose that we're not able to capitalize on that in our economy. And so people all over the world, who even if they come here and they're educated, here in our school systems are taking the products back and building up the Chinese economy. So I think we need to have also a fair assessment of how we got here. And it was under not just this administration's watch, but members who've served in Congress up to this point, not sending a clear message on where they stand on trade. And that's why China's able to run amok, because there's been no accountability, nor checks or balances.
Next question is on climate and energy. Richard Watkins first, and then over to Michelle Lawson, Congressman Price. Take 1 minute each for this one. What do you see as the most important 2 or 3 actions that Congress can take to slow the climate crisis and move us to a more sustainable energy system? Richard Watkins.
I think this is the biggest issue that faces all of humanity. To be quite frank, that humanity can't survive for very long with the current progression of climate change. I think one of the first things that Congress can do is definitely start trying through legislation, reintroduce some of the policies that were included in the Paris Climate Agreement. We also have an opportunity to create massive amount of jobs when all of these companies can switch over to a sustainable economy. I mean, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of homes that can be updated. We're talking about the American workers here, right? Think about an economy that switches to green and renewable energy. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of jobs. This is serious here. This is life and this is money, and we have an opportunity to do it, but the window is very narrow. Every single person in political power needs to make this issue number 1.
Michelle Laws.
Kudos, I agree. That's very smart of you, Doctor. I agree. And I'm proud of our area here. I think we've led the way in Chapel Hill and Carrboro, advocating for sound policies and practices and making it a norm. I do think, however, that we have to look at the EPA and its function and its role and invest more in making sure that we put teeth in policies and regs that we already have on the books. So companies and corporations like Duke Energy that spill and allow coal ash to contaminate our waterways should not period, be allowed to shift that burden back onto consumers and the youth. Those are things that we can do to try and mitigate the harm that's being done right now without new legislation, adding teeth, putting teeth to the policies that we already have, and having members in Congress, as well as those who are negotiating here at the state level, to say, under no circumstance will we allow corporations to get away with polluting our airways and our waterways. And I think pushing back, as many of us are, and have advocated for against fracking, I think we must send that message loud and clear that there is no retreat. I grew up partly in Pritchard Public Housing and then partly on Rogers Road. I know the effects of living near a landfill. I know the effects of living where environmental justice is not given, but instead you are the community that suffers the brunt of the burden for us not controlling and protecting. And certainly green and renewable energy is something that I would, in all public especially forms, I would advocate for.
Congressman
Public
Price.
buildings, transportation.
You asked for the top most important proposals. I'll suggest 4. First, protect, preserve, enforce the Paris Accords. Secondly, preserve, protect, enforce President Obama's Clean Power Plan to shift our power generation to cleaner forms of energy and to reduce emissions. Third, enact greenhouse gas controls of some description. My preferred approach is a price on carbon. I think that's the most efficient, effective, and simplest way. We tried earlier with this cap and trade system that had worked pretty well for acid rain. I'm open to however we can get this done, but I think a price on carbon is the most efficient way. We've got to get an overall universal system that gets greenhouse gas emissions down. And then fourth, develop renewables. Renewables are on the way. Solar, wind. This renewable energy is taking on more and more of the generation of power. And we need to do a crash program on research, to develop storage, to develop other ways of making renewables work. And at the same time, we need to provide incentives so that they break into the marketplace in a way that I believe can be sustained for the long haul.
Next question goes to Michelle Laws first. Take 2 minutes on this one. What concrete steps would you take to dismantle institutionalized racism, particularly in the context of our criminal justice system?
Ooh, Lord, have mercy. So the first step I would take is for us to make sure that every person that's sitting, in terms of the criminal justice system, that's sitting on the bench, that has on a uniform representing the state in any form or fashion, understands that there is a zero tolerance policy and practice and expectation for racism, and began to make sure that our Department of Justice not only looks at and investigates allegations, but that we actually began to see, in especially the most egregious cases, some people held accountable for their actions. Killing a little black child on a playground that has a pretend gun, or strangling someone who says, "I can't breathe," should be unacceptable and unconscionable to us all. And we've got to send the message that coming back with a failure to hold people accountable is simply unacceptable. We've got to put some indicators in place where there are thresholds that people, institutions in particularly, whether it's higher institutions of higher ed, whether it's in the criminal justice system, are monitored and checked. And there's always patterns that indicate that there's racism existing or discriminate practices existing. We've just turned a blind eye to too many of them. And we've got to have a criminal justice reform that really takes a look at why we are incarcerating black and brown bodies at the rate that we are, especially for nonviolent misdemeanors. You should not serve time in jail because you smoked a joint and didn't have a diversion program. So that means putting money into diversion programs. But also you shouldn't be sitting in jail because you can't pay a bail for a nonviolent misdemeanor.
Congressman Price.
This is a huge challenge for our country, and it covers a number of fronts. The fact that we are incarcerating as many people as we do for the offenses that we do, and there's clearly a racial disparity involved in how that works, is something that is a disgrace to our country and something that we need to confront. And we need to confront it with serious policies in a number of areas. I'll just tick them off. We do need a judicial reform, and to stop incarcerating people for these possession offenses. We actually need to consider letting the states legalize marijuana and marijuana possession, and to deal with that in a more rational way. The different kinds of drug offenses have racial disparities built into them. We've dealt with that to some degree, but not completely. We need to deal with these situations of police misconduct, make certain that that conduct is prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and more importantly, that it is prevented. That we have clear rules of engagement, that our police forces, of course, who want to serve, the vast majority, want to serve and do serve well, but they need to be trained. They have to have the kind of background going into the force and going into these difficult situations that will prevent disasters. We need to give people a second chance coming out of incarceration. I've been a proud sponsor for a year of my friend Danny Davis's Second Chance Act. I wear as a badge of honor that Chief Heinemann a few years ago, well, not so, when he was trying to keep his office, when I managed to make my comeback, he ran ads about how I favored Pell Grants for prisoners. You bet I did. You bet I did. Those people in prison are going to be out, and they need to have some training, some ability to take on a job, and they certainly need to be able to retain the vote when they come out. There's more. It's a big topic.
Richard Watkins.
So the question is always asked, why are there so many black people in prison? Look no further than the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment allows for constitutionally allowed slavery. So if you ask me what concrete steps that I would make, I would put an end to the privatized prison system, which banks on the captivity of black and brown people. We should be ashamed to call ourselves the land of the free and the home of the brave when we incarcerate more children and more people than any other country in the world. That is shameful. Second thing, everybody deserves their day in court. Most of the people who actually go to jail actually enter a plea deal and never get an opportunity to go before a judge and a jury of their peers. That is wrong, and that is not American. Next thing I would do is I would legalize marijuana, and all of the black and brown people who were in jail, immediately release them. The next thing I would do is I'd end the war on drugs. It's a failed war which only goes to shunt black and brown people into prison system. Again, a continuation of slavery. The next thing is I would remove from job applications, and I would prevent job employers for asking people if they've committed a crime. Because one of the biggest reasons for recidivism is lack of opportunities. If you go to jail, you have absolutely no opportunity as a black person or a brown person to go out there and provide for your children, to provide for your family. So what other option do you have but to go back and doing the same things that put you there in the first place? So those are concrete examples, and that's a way to end institutionalized racism within our criminal justice system. Thank you.
Next question goes to Congressman Price first. Take 2 minutes on this one, too. What are some of your priorities around immigration reform?
I favor comprehensive immigration reform and have fought for it for years. Immigration is a source of strength and progress for this country, and it's been that way since the very beginning. And Donald Trump has taken the already toxic, already difficult issue of immigration reform and has made it absolutely impossible to bring people together in a fair and reasonable way to deal with this. So comprehensive immigration reform, and by that I mean giving people who are here, who have worked, who have supported their families, giving them a path to citizenship, having a fair set of laws with respect to how people get on the ladder toward a green card and toward citizenship, having a legal system, an enforcement system that is fair and that people can count on. I have taken the leadership in this as a Homeland Security Appropriations Chairman. We insisted with the Bush administration that enforcement in this country ought to be focused on violent criminals. As they come out of the penal system, it's fair enough that we should know who they are and that they should be targets for deportation, people who will do the community harm. We need to make certain that people who are prepared to contribute to this country, who are here for the very understandable and good reason they want to make a better life for their families, that they have a way forward and a way to legal status and to citizenship. And of course, the current issue of the Dreamers is just absolutely imperative. President Trump, again, has just blown this up. Obama did what he could with the orders, protective orders. Trump's blown it up. We need, of course, to protect the Dreamers.
Richard Watkins.
I think we have to realize when we hear the Trump administration talk about their plans for immigration, that it is entirely racist. When they say these things, they're not talking about immigration as a whole. They're talking about targeting Mexicans and other Hispanics. It is a dog whistle to their base. That's why in places where their base feels threatened, you see that a lot. And it is actually no surprise that there's money behind it as well. One of the people who fund the president and other Republicans that take a hard stance on immigration are people who own detention facilities. We have to begin to shift every single conversation regarding immigration away from the racist narrative that we are currently experiencing. Listen, I actually see nothing wrong with abolishing ICE. In fact, ICE treats people inhumanely, arrests people in hospitals, waits outside. They are absolutely uncontrollable. Let's rein them back in and focus, with terms of immigration, on humanity. Let's focus on humanity and get away from racism. Thank you.
Michelle Laws.
I think it definitely is a humanity issue and a human rights issue, and I agree. We're not hearing the same type of rhetoric about Europeans coming in. In fact, our president said that that's who he would open the borders to. I also think, however, it's been a one-sided conversation, and so part of immigration reform to me also includes penalizing employers who bring people over here to work for slave wages and who encourages that type of migration, and then penalizes people by not helping them to become citizens once they've been here and increased the profits of their companies and done the work in their homes. So I'm all about being 100% open and candid about how we got into the position with immigration reform, needing immigration reform. One, we were lax on businesses, and we also created a situation of hostility towards Black and brown people that has been used as the perfect perfect dog whistle for those extremists on the right. So I do agree that we've got to shift the conversation and make it a conversation about humanity. We also have to make sure that we're putting funding into helping people who have been on the waiting list and have been waiting and done all the right things to become legalized citizens to become so. We haven't put funding, but in any of the right places, only on the enforcement side. So I think one of the things that's desperately needed is to increase funding to help begin to move people through the process. And then DACA, protecting the deferred action for childhood arrivals would definitely be something that I will go and stand up for with all I have. It's the humane thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and we're talking about neighbors and family members at this point.
We're going to move ahead now to the lightning round, so pay attention to Kim. Every question is going to be 30 seconds. We're going to move ahead now because actually our first lightning round question, Richard Watkins, you actually touched on in your immigration answer. So you get this first question off. First one goes to Michelle Laws and then David Price. Just following up on the immigration question, a specific one. Do you support removing the immigration function from ICE? Michelle Laws,
Absolutely.
first 30 seconds.
Yes.
David Price?
Removing the immigration function.
From ICE.
So that means
There would be no immigration enforcement whatsoever?
From ICE.
Well, there has to be an immigration enforcement function of some sort. If you ask whether I think ICE is greatly abusing its power and its authority and it has much more money than it needs, the answer to that's yes.
First question for everyone. Again, 30 seconds on this. Richard Watkins first. Should the U.S. Embassy to Israel be located in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem?
So that's a really difficult question, and I would actually defer that question to the experts who have continuously advised against it. And so when Donald Trump did that, it was not necessarily a good thing, but I have to admit my expertise is not in that matter, so I would actually consult with the professionals and the advisors on that particular matter who've experienced situations on the ground. I would definitely listen to the experts in that area.
Michelle Laws.
I think that move only exacerbated the conflict between the Palestinians and Israel, and that was not the right move at all. And I do think that we need to have a serious conversation about how we treat both fairly and don't give preferential treatment and privileges to one over the other. Both of their hands are dirty with blood at this point, and we've got to stop the carnage that's going on there, where babies and children and women are being killed because of this conflict.
Congressman Price.
The answer to your question is no, the embassy should remain in Tel Aviv, and if it's moved to Jerusalem, that should be part of a final status solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians, a two-state solution. That's been the posture of every U.S. administration until Donald Trump came to power.
Continuing with the lightning round, 30 seconds for this one. Congressman Price first. If the Democrats take control of the House, would you support moving ahead with impeachment proceedings? We'll assume given what we know now.
We very well may find ourselves in impeachment territory. The Russia probe, the emoluments, and the conflicts of interest of the Trump family. We have only one shot at impeachment. So it has to be a successful shot. That means the Mueller investigation must be completed. I'm sponsoring legislation to protect Mueller from Trump's likely attempts to fire him. But one of the main reasons the Democrats had better take the House is that we're going to have to call this president to account.
Richard
I'm
Watkins.
convinced of it.
Moderator, can you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, if the Democrats take control of the House, would you support moving ahead with impeachment proceedings?
Absolutely.
Michelle Laws.
I would, but you know what? I oftentimes think you deal with the devil you know than the one you don't, and I'm not really sure about where Penn stands on some of these issues either. So I would take a close look at him as well.
Richard Watkins on this one first. Again, 30 seconds. Do you support making public colleges and universities tuition free?
Absolutely.
Michelle Laws.
Say that all public colleges and universities?
Public colleges and universities tuition free.
You know, I've struggled with this. I think community colleges, yes. I think reducing the debt ratio and putting a cap on what we can charge for tuition, yes, because what ends up happening is those who have more continue to get access to more. And until we can dismantle this system of oppression in terms of who comes into colleges and universities, I'm not really sure that I would blanketly say that, because right now there's a disparity in terms of who gets into certain colleges and universities.
Congressman Price.
To simply state the proposition as you did would be fatal to HBCUs, there are lots of them, and to liberal arts colleges. What we need to do is to focus on the student and whatever it will take to give the student access to higher education. There's way too little in the way of Pell Grants and other scholarships available. There's way too much in the way of a debt load. And there is way too little accessibility for a diverse education. Community colleges, really, President Obama said we should think of it as K through 14. I agree with that. That's time. Higher education needs to be accessible.
Michelle Laws on this one, and thanks to the audience now, I'm moving into these questions. Do you believe in a system of universal basic income? 30 seconds.
Universal basic income, I'm not sure what that means, but so should everybody have a living wage and basic
provided
income
to everyone regardless of employment.
regardless of employment? So I grew up on public assistance. It sounds like public assistance to me, but people worked. There was a work requirement. So universal basic income, no. I think there are certain things that we can put in place, though, that we need to make sure that we reduce poverty in our country, and I'm not sure that that's the answer.
Congressman Price.
We need a universal living wage, and we need a solid, secure safety net, and we need to fight the Republicans who at this moment are wanting to cut millions and millions of people off of basic things like food stamps and wanting to decimate Medicaid. Listen, this is where the battle's being joined, and there's no question what we're up against.
Richard Watkins.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, it's over here. Do you believe in a system of universal basic income?
Yes, I do. And I guess I could explain why, because I've been short answers. With the development of technology, it's going to really be hard for people to find living jobs. Actually, a lot of people have warned against this. Steve Jobs, Tim Cook, what's the gentleman with the SpaceX? Sorry, I'm running short. You're going to have these type of things because Elon Musk. Sorry, can I get like 10 seconds because I was looking for help? But yeah, we're going to really have to have these things because we're going to approach a time where people aren't able to support themselves. Thank you.
Congressman Price on this one again, 30 seconds. What can be done in Congress to help eliminate gerrymandering in elections?
Well, speaking of the We the People Act, it would do just that. It would require every state to have a nonpartisan commission to draw the congressional districts, as they do already in California, Arizona, New Jersey, Iowa, and many other places. So state by state, I'd like to have a federal law that requires all the states to do it. In fact, I've introduced such a law. Second front is the judicial. If we win this Wisconsin case, that's a game changer for the districts after 2020.
Richard Watkins.
I absolutely support a nonpartisan commission. However, I still am afraid of the process of individuals picking their voters. We have to figure out a way to get around it because consistently those with power have exploited those without power. And it will continue to happen even if you have a nonpartisan commission. We need to figure out a way to have a true system where the voters pick their representatives and not the other way around. So we really need to look into that because that's the only way that we'll have a sustainable democracy.
Finally, the person who drove through Durham across Raleigh to get here, Michelle Laws.
And also who was the executive director of the NAACP when we were fighting in the courts against what we call the monster voter suppression bill in North Carolina. thanks to many of you in this room. So absolutely, I agree. I have read the We the People Act, and I do think that the proposals in there are exactly what we need. I am in favor of a nonpartisan commission to draw the lines, but I also think this is a connection to money in politics. When people can pay to have certain people at the table to draw the lines, their hands are clean, those who are members of Congress often, because they've hired folk like the Koch brothers, or the Koch brothers have come in, or Pope.
One more lightning round question, and then we can take a breather. Richard Watkins first on this one. What can Congress do to reduce... Start again. What can Congress do to reduce pharmaceutical prices?
We need to actually drive down the cost of research. In fact, the way that a actual treatment gets to marketplace requires so much money. And so there's only a small handful of corporations that can actually develop these drug targets and actually get the drugs to market. So we need to really address that first and allow more corporations and more research groups the opportunity to conduct research that would lead to these drug developments. And that's the biggest way to get around reducing the cost of pharmaceutics.
Michelle Laws.
I agree, and reduce the time from when a drug actually hits the street as a generic drug and the cost begins to drop. I think we can definitely look at monitoring what some of the pharmaceutical companies are doing to inflate the cost during that period as well. And we know the case with the $800 pill, I think for heart disease or wherever it was that Hillary Clinton pointed out. And so I think we have to be really hawks and look at what pharmaceutical companies are now doing to inflate the cost and set penalties for those who do.
Congressman Price.
We need to close the donut hole in Part D Medicare so that consumers aren't paying full freight at any point in their medical needs. And then we need to introduce competitive bidding under Part D, just as we have in the VA, to drive those drug prices down. Also, we need to encourage the use of generics.
Sorry. You'll have a closing statement, so. All right, next question, and this also goes to Richard Watkins first, and then over to Michelle Laws and Congressman Price. What steps do you plan on taking to alleviate the crushing burden of student debt?
Oh yeah, I think one of the...
1 minute on this one.
Okay, well, I think one of the easiest way to do that is to actually implement that previous question. If you actually provide tuition-free college education, that would be the easiest way to alleviate student debt. Now listen, I'm talking from experience. I'm an individual who never, ever had to pay for education, ever. I went to Fayetteville State, HBCU shout out, for absolutely free, and then I went on a PhD program, absolutely free, and that was all supported by taxpayer dollars. And when you're able to go to school tuition free, you don't leave with student debt, it's easier to buy a home, which puts a lot of people behind the ball when they start, and you're able to really actually expand and utilize your talents because you're not always thinking about how am I gonna pay for this? Let me just pick a job that I don't like just so I can alleviate that student debt. And I think I got 2 yellow cards, but that's my point, sorry.
Michelle Laws.
I would put a cap on interest rates for student loans. No student loan interest rates can go higher than 2%. I would also have loan forgiveness after 10 years. I would also forgive loans for those who go and work in the public sector, which we do for some. I've benefited from some of that. And I think we need to hold on to that type of program, implement a system like AmeriCorps or Teach for America for all professions. If you go into a poor and low wealth area and you work, then you should get loan forgiveness for working in those areas for a certain amount of time.
Congressman Price.
We need to improve the ratio of scholarships to loans. That means raising the maximum amount of Pell Grants, making more money available for Pell Grants, and encouraging diverse education alternatives, supporting our community colleges, which are not only economical, but prepare people for the real jobs in the workplace. And then student loan reform itself. President Obama started down this path. We took out the middlemen. We have more generous repayment requirements. Trump is in the process right this minute of rolling those back, of having an open door to the Treasury for-profit schools. for-profit schools where a lot of the money is going for scholarships and for loans. This needs to be reformed in a comprehensive way, and if it is, then the kind of loans can be a legitimate part of a person's educational finance plan, but they shouldn't burden you for life, and they should be responsive. Your repayment requirements should be responsive to the kind of job you hold.
Next question goes to Michelle Laws first. Take 1 minute on this one, too. What kind of comprehensive transportation system beyond light rail do you envision for this region, and what steps will you take in Congress to realize this vision?
I do think we need to look at rebuilding and repairing our roads and our bridges. There was a study that was done that said many of the bridges across America are in critical disrepair and or damage, and are actually a threat and risk. And so I think I would first look at repairing many of our bridges, investing in money for bridges and roads. But I also want to say there's been a disparate distribution of funding that have gone to people who have done infrastructure projects. Oftentimes, the same people get the funding, and it's happened in this district as well. The same people get the funding. Minority-owned businesses do not typically get competitive bids in and approved. And so I would look at the way in which the funding is also made available so that everyone is participating in rebuilding our infrastructure. My concern, I think, lies more there.
Congressman Price.
Infrastructure, if we don't watch it, is an Achilles heel of our region. We simply have to have a modernized, diverse infrastructure. For the Triangle area, that means light rail. It means regional rail across the spine of the region. It means augmented bus service out into the smaller towns and rural areas. We need to promote intercity rail. Raleigh to Charlotte is in pretty good shape now. We're building Union Station in downtown Raleigh with the help of Tiger funds. We're going to have a great Amtrak stop in Hillsborough. We need to promote that all the way, Raleigh to Richmond. And then finally, our airport is world class, but we got runway needs. One of my main jobs on the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee is to make certain that that money is flowing and that we are in a position to take advantage of it.
Richard Watkins.
Infrastructure is a huge need. Not only will it improve our lives, but it will provide a lot of jobs. Yeah, of course, we need to repair bridges. Bridges definitely need to be repaired. There's bridges that are on the verge of collapsing all across our country. We also need to repair roads. But this is something that a lot of people don't think about. Think about your drinking water. EPA, right here at UNC, and EPA in Raleigh, have actually shown that our crumbling infrastructure regarding plumbing and regarding water actually is a tremendous factor that influences the development of bladder cancer. So not only is infrastructure important for jobs and getting from point A to point B, improvement of infrastructure improves overall health of a community, and I definitely will bring that to Washington, D.C.
Next question goes to Congressman Price. First, take 1 minute on this one. In light of Iran's regional influence, what would your Iran policy look like?
There's nothing I've worked harder on in the foreign policy realm than to secure and protect the Iran nuclear agreement. A major diplomatic achievement, and people, of course, have lots of problems with Iran's continuing bad behavior in the international arena, but I can tell you there's not a thing they're doing that wouldn't be far, far worse if this was a nuclear power. So if you ask me what my main immediate worry is about this president and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, it's that they are going to scuttle that Iran nuclear agreement. And that is an absolute disaster. So that's just so basic. You've got to preserve that agreement. I hope in the future there are ways we can work to improve the relationship with Iran. But they are bad actors. And there are other things that we're going to need to do about their behavior. But we've got to preserve, it's desperately important to preserve that agreement.
Richard Watkins.
We definitely need to improve relations with Iran and a lot of other countries in the region. We definitely have to reduce the likelihood of any type of nuclear threat or the use of any nuclear weapon. It so happens to be the case that if enough nuclear warheads are released anywhere in the world and the entire planet will actually experience a nuclear winter. And we are seeing that with a lot of different countries, especially not just in Iran, but the tension between India and Pakistan. So I support what David Price and Michelle Laws had already, I can't remember, I'm thrown off. I'm sure she's gonna say it, but we have to reduce the likelihood of this happening. And I definitely support what all of the advisors are saying, uphold the Iran nuclear deal.
Michelle Laws.
Yep, uphold the Iran nuclear agreement. And I'm concerned about the treatment of women and girls. And so one of the things I would do is to enforce stricter policies and practices that make sure that we are helping to protect women and girls and to liberate them from oppressive regimes all over the world, and particularly in Iran. And I think we have an obligation to, they say if you break it, you build it. Let's not forget how complicit we've been in this too, at different times. And so we've helped to break it, and I think we should look at diplomatic means before we look at a defense response of going in and trying to figure out, because it's for the safety of, it's children and women that are caught up in the wars that men wage.
Richard Watkins first on this one. I'll try to shorten the question as I read it. Patriot Act and related bills believed by some to be contrary to the Fourth Amendment in the wake of the Facebook data breach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What would you do to assure your constituents on their right to privacy? Take 1 minute.
This is a really tough one because the way we think about privacy is not true. The contemporary realization of privacy is the sense that nothing is private. Through the use of cameras on phones, cameras, closed circuit cameras, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whether or not you're even driving a car that keeps track of where you go, your GPS, if you don't go on your phone and actually turn off tracking. I think one of the things that needs to happen, and I'm terribly concerned with this, is that our interface with technology has made it so that nothing is private. And we really need to have a serious conversation about this. Facebook is a huge one. There's other social media threats out there. There's other threats to our privacy, and currently, there's no such thing as privacy, and we actually need to fight to ensure that.
Michelle Laws.
The Patriot Act was bad when the Bush administration first introduced and got it through. And it has still been bad and has gotten worse. And I was expecting, our existing Congress during each iterations of presidential administrations that have come, President Obama's two, and now the one that we have now, to have done away with it. I do think in order to protect citizens' rights to privacy, we cannot implement legislation that violates citizens' rights to privacy.
Congressman Price.
The Patriot Act has been renewed numerous times. I initially supported it as an emergency measure. Every time since then have voted against it because I think what was an emergency measure has been turned into an excuse for inordinate government surveillance and control, violating basic privacy rights. I feel the same way, voted consistently against these FISA renewals that that give us inadequate protections against massive data mining and other practices. Facebook is just an incredible revelation of how far this has gone and how dangerous it is. So our poster boy, Mr. Zuckerberg, will be before the Congress tomorrow. He's going to get quite a grilling, and he deserves one. But beyond this, we need to have policies in place that let us know where our data is being utilized and also give us a chance to opt out of that and hold these companies to account.
That's time. It's 8:30. We've got the room until 9, so I'm calling moderator privilege and asking these two more audience questions on issues that we haven't touched on yet, but I think a lot of people will want. So take 1 minute each on these, and then we'll get to our closing statements, beginning with Michelle Laws. Which gun regulations would you advocate for most strongly in Congress?
So my sister was killed in a murder-suicide right here, up the street on Franklin Street in 1991. The weapon of choice was a gun. Her ex-boyfriend killed her and then killed himself, and they left behind a 1-year-old son. Not too long ago, 2 years ago, it will be this year, a 1-year-old baby Malia, was killed in the public housing community that I grew up in, and the family contacted me. Gun rights or enforcing stricter gun laws is not a political issue for me, it's a very personal one. So I do believe a ban on all assault rifles and all modifications to semi-automatics, including bump stocks. I also believe that hurt people, and we've got to invest in mental health services and treatment to also prepare families and first responders to be able to identify the risk factors. And then we also have to hold gun vendors and sellers accountable for the laws that are on the books for not doing appropriate background checks.
Congressman Price.
Let's hope this time is different with these young people speaking out so courageously after the Stoneman Douglas killings. My wife Lisa's here tonight. She and other friends started the North Carolinians Against Gun Violence 25 years ago. Wasn't Sandy Hook enough? Wasn't 9 people in Charleston in a church in a prayer meeting enough? I mean, what is it going to take? It must be different this time. I do feel like it may be. But the measures we need to push are pretty straightforward. Let's have background checks that really work, that are universal. Every transaction subject to a check. Keep guns out of the wrong hands. That's as basic as it gets. This business about when should you be able to buy an assault rifle, you should never be able to buy one.
Right.
You're never old enough to have this weapon of mass killing on the street. And Marcia Maury has introduced, and I think it's a good idea. It may just be new enough to catch on, this red flag proposal. Think about these 3 Muslim students killed in Chapel Hill. Think about how everybody in that complex knew this guy is bad news. This guy has an arsenal in his apartment. Why shouldn't there have been a restraining order available to the law enforcement to keep that guy out of trouble?
So, of course, I agree in these common sense gun legislation, banning bump stocks, banning assault rifles, closing the gun show loopholes, universal background checks. But we also need to stop the gun lobby from influencing our politicians and funneling money into the political process, which makes it absolutely impossible for common sense gun legislation to occur. Listen, this is a serious problem. Since 1999, and I use 1999 specifically because that was Columbine, there have been over 200 school shootings. We really need to think about, what do we value more, liberty or life? Life is over liberty. It's impossible to have any liberties if you're not alive to enjoy them. And I will have you think, I don't think we're too far away from a constitutional convention through the Balanced Budget Act. And so some of these things are actually going to be called into question when this happens. And you know about the Balanced Budget Act. It's a very scary situation. But we're gonna have to ask ourselves as a country, how violent do we wanna be, or how much we value life? Thank you.
One more question, Congressman Price. First, take 1 minute on this. As a lesbian living in the district, says the writer, and I'll add as a gay man who's getting married in a month and 10 days, I did all the work myself. I'd like to know what specifically you will do in Congress to advance the rights of LGBT people. Congressman Price first.
Well, we have to fully acknowledge the notion that LGBTQ rights are civil rights, are human rights, and they deserve the full protection of the law, just as any other civil rights based on race or religion or gender deserve. That's just the starting principle. And that applies to employment. It applies to the full range of freedoms that our citizens enjoy. We have made great strides with the right to marry. Congratulations. But that needs to be made real as magistrates do their duty and as that right is fully enjoyed.
Richard Watkins.
I absolutely agree. Need to be made a federally protected class, just as a lot of other demographics are being made. We need to provide the full menu of American rights to every citizen of America, and we need to actually change the way that we publicly talk about it. And it's happening, but we can't forget that the most alienated group within the LGBTQIA community are those members who are also underrepresented themselves before going into that. So Black and brown people, those people are particularly left out of the conversation in the movement forward. So first things first, we have to make them a federally protected group, just like as everyone else is made. We also need to switch the dialogue in which we talk about this situation to be more normalized, just like everyone else. And I think that is the way forward in this country. Thank you.
Michelle Laws.
I agree, and in terms of making the LGBTQI community a protected class, we need to add sexual orientation and sexual preference and identities, whatever that is. Equal protection under the law should mean equal protection under the law for everyone. And we need to enforce that law for everyone. And as a member of two classes that have been historically marginalized in this country, a woman and an African American, I understand how important the expediency of this issue is. We cannot do it incrementally. We have to send a strong message and to say that we will not stand as a country for the terrorizing of any group, for the exclusion of any group, for the oppression of any group. Period. And be very clear on what we mean by equal protection under the law. And as my friend Candace Cox, who endorsed me, who is a transgender woman, said, and in agreement with Richard, we have to look at those groups within that status that are also being unfairly treated and oppressed and exploited.
Thanks to all of our candidates. I apologize to all of the people who asked questions that we weren't able to get to tonight, but it's time for our closing statements. 2 minutes on this one to sum up everything that we've talked about tonight and make your final pitch to our voters here today, beginning with Richard Watkins, then Michelle Laws, and Congressman Price.
So I'll start off by talking about the reason that I decided to run. The core reason is that I have stake in the future. That's what shapes my thinking. You can always know where someone is going or the commitment that someone has is if they have stake in it. A lot of people think about the past and a lot of people think about the present. My number one focus is the future. The reason I decided to run, and a lot of people can actually relate to this, is when I saw the election of Donald Trump, my wife called me on the phone, and I could hear that she had been crying, and she said, "Richard, you've got to do something." I did not know how I was going to do it. I knew that it was going to be a tall, steep mountain, but I wasn't too afraid because we are all in the same boat, as I said earlier, and we all have a tough road ahead, regardless of your race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, or income. We're facing some very tough times regarding climate change, regarding the gap between the top 1% and everyone else, and actually living up to the true meaning of democracy, allowing everyone a seat at the table, allowing everyone not just the opportunity to vote, but the encouragement and the support to run. I am running because I represent you. I'm Richard Watkins, your candidate for the 4th Congressional District, and I'm running for the future, your future. Thank you.
Thank you all for this opportunity, and I'm asking for your vote. I'm a native of this town. I was birthed in this town around progressive ideals and still believe strongly in those ideals. I also believe that we are where Dr. King said, faced with the fierce urgency of now. Not only am I concerned about our country, but I'm concerned about the party that used to lead the way to higher ground each and every time we were called upon to do so. We led the way in fighting against oppression in the South and segregationists in the South. to civil rights laws that were enacted and passed in the 60s. We led the way on the right in the fight for women's rights. We've led the way, but we've lost some of that way. And it's evident, Congressman Price said earlier that we're in the right direction. It's evident that that may be true for some, but many that I come in contact with and many who have fled this party and who are now unaffiliated or who did not show up to make sure we kept that tyrant out of the White House don't feel the same way. It's time now for our party to take a different path with a different leader, one that takes us back to the original ideals of this party, the belief in justice and fairness and equality for all. We have become a party of elites. We've become a party where far too many people of color have felt abandoned, and especially women. I want to go and fight for the same ideals that I know many of you fight for. Why? Because I'm one of you. I was born here. My roots are here. I still believe in the pursuit of happiness and liberty, and I still believe, like I did when I was a little girl growing up in Pritchard Public Housing, that I could dream big and I had a community that would help lift me up and make sure that I reach those dreams. I want that for every child. I want that for everyone, and I'm asking for your vote. Now is the time for us to change. I cannot risk the next generation on a hypothetical, what if I become the chair? We need to make that decision now in 2018, not 2020.
Congressman Price.
Thank you to the Progressive Caucus for putting this on and for helping us focus on just how critical the decisions we face are. We're in the fight of our political lives. And I do believe I'm running again because I think this fight is one, and it's going to take a critical form in the next 2 years. It's a situation where experience, judgment, a proven track record make a difference. And I'm offering that to the voters as I run for re-election in the 4th District. I will forever be grateful that I came of age politically in this community in the midst of the civil rights movement in the early 60s, and that has shaped my view ever since of politics and government and religion and everything else. It was totally a formative experience. And that's the real reason I have entered public service. Much, much more basic than anything else that ever happened to me. Some people are nostalgic for those years, and of course they were wonderful years in the way they transformed our community and our country. But the challenges now are fully as compelling, and it is possibly even more important, if you can imagine, for us to be engaged. I mean, what can't we get excited about when millions and millions of people are about to lose their health insurance? Why can't we mobilize ourselves when refugees, most desperate people in the world, are being basically turned away from this country, and where immigrants are being demonized and the very historical basis of this country is being threatened? What do we make of the fact that North Carolina is #1 in this country for voter suppression, for denying people that hard-earned right to vote? Friends, we have to get our act together, and we have to get it together in a unified and convincing way. I'm sure we're going to do that. The energy is great. Let's just go forward. I'm proud to be on your team.
Give all of our candidates a round of applause. Keep the applause going for the Progressive Democrats who put all of this together today. Susan's got a couple of announcements.
Thank you. Just a few thank yous and a couple reminders before we let you go. First of all, it takes a village to put on a candidate forum. So I want to do a shout out to our Progressive Democrats of Orange County: Rebecca, Kim, Tony, Elizabeth from Wake County, Kathy in the back, Dan, John, where's Joni? Joni. Is that everybody? And of course to our moderator extraordinaire, Aaron. You can find him on WCHL and at Chapelboro and Mazel Tov. To our insightful, thoughtful candidates and to their staffs who helped pull this together also. To Michelle, David Price, Richard Watkins.
I didn't have a staff, but thank you.
Michelle and her family. That's her staff. Early voting starts April 19th. Vote. Nobody can afford to miss an election anymore. Vote, get people registered, volunteer. They need people for greeters at early voting and at election day too. Be an activist, be an advocate. We are the democracy, we are the people. We are the government. We run the show, we need to take it back. Thank you so much, thank you. We're sorry we didn't get to all your audience questions. We tried to give a good cross-section. There are so many questions. Keep asking the questions, hold our candidates' feet to the fire. And thank you all for sharing this evening with us.